The mashed potatoes hit me square in the face, chunks sliding down my cheek and landing with a wet splat on my carefully pressed blouse. For a moment, the dining room fell completely silent except for the sound of gravy dripping onto the hardwood floor I'd spent 3 hours polishing that morning. 8-year-old Tyler giggled from his booster seat, his chubby fingers already reaching for another handful of food. "Bullseye, Grandma!" He squealed with delight, as if throwing dinner at me was the most natural thing in the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood there frozen, mashed potatoes slowly sliding down my face, while my daughter Sarah and son-in-law Mark exchanged one of those looks. The kind that said they were more annoyed at having to deal with this than actually concerned about what had just happened. "Tyler, that's not nice," Sarah said in that sing-song voice parents use when they don't really mean it. She didn't even look up from her phone where she was scrolling through Instagram. "Say sorry to Grandma." Tyler stuck out his tongue. "No. It's funny," Mark chuckled and ruffled Tyler's hair. "Boys will be boys, right, Mom?" He shot me a grin that was supposed to be charming but just looked dismissive. "He's just being playful. Kids, you know how they are." I wiped mashed potatoes from my cheek with my napkin, trying to keep my voice steady. This is the 4th time. This week he's thrown food at me. Last Tuesday it was spaghetti, Wednesday was yogurt, and yesterday— "Mom, you're being dramatic," Sarah interrupted, finally looking up from her screen with an exasperated sigh. "He's 8 years old. This is normal behavior. You raised 3 kids yourself. Surely you remember what it was like." Actually, I did remember. None of my children, including Sarah, had ever thrown food at an adult. If they had, there would have been immediate consequences. But apparently, pointing that out would make me the villain here. Maybe if you didn't react so strongly, he wouldn't. "Find it so entertaining," Mark added helpfully, cutting into his pot roast like nothing had happened. "Kids pick up on that kind of energy." So now it was my fault. Of course. I glanced around the dining room, my dining room, in my house, where I'd been hosting Sunday dinners for the past 15 years. The walls were decorated with family photos, spanning decades: Sarah's graduation, her wedding, Tyler's first steps, countless birthdays and holidays. This room had always been the heart of our family gatherings, filled with laughter and love and the kind of memories that last a lifetime. But something had shifted in recent years. What used to be joyful family time had gradually morphed into me cooking elaborate meals while everyone else sat around expecting to be served. Tyler had become increasingly wild and disrespectful, and instead of correcting him, Sarah and Mark seemed to think it was amusing. Or worse, they blamed me for being too sensitive. "I spent 4 hours making this meal," I said quietly, gesturing to the table laden with Tyler's favorites: pot roast with all the fixings, homemade dinner rolls, green bean casserole, and a chocolate cake that was cooling in the kitchen. "I got up at 6 this morning to start the roast. I made the rolls from scratch because Tyler likes them better than store-bought." "And it's delicious, Mom," Sarah said, without looking up from her phone again. "We really appreciate it." But her tone said otherwise. It was the same tone you'd use to thank a waitress, polite but distant, as if my efforts were simply expected rather than appreciated. Tyler, meanwhile, had grown bored with the conversation and was now using his fork to flick green beans across the table. "One landed in my water glass." "Tyler," I said firmly. "Stop that right now." His little face scrunched up in defiance. "You're not the boss of me. Mommy said you can't tell me what to do." I looked at Sarah sharply. "You said what?" Sarah had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Well, I mean, you can be a bit overbearing sometimes, Mom. Tyler has his own parents to discipline him. You don't need to—" "In my own house?" My voice was getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. "I can't ask for basic respect in my own home?" "You're overreacting," Mark said, not even bothering to look at me. He's just being a kid. Maybe you've forgotten what that's like since it's been so long. The casual cruelty of that comment hit me like a physical blow. It's been so long. As if my age somehow disqualified me from expecting decent treatment. As if the fact that I was 62 meant I should just accept being treated like hired help in my own home. Tyler, sensing the tension and clearly enjoying it, grabbed a dinner roll and hurled it at me. It bounced off my shoulder and rolled under the china cabinet. This time I'd had enough. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Get out. Sarah looked up from her phone, startled. What? I said, get out. All of you, leave my house. Mark laughed like I'd told a joke. Come on, Mom, don't be so dramatic. Kids throw food sometimes, it's not the end of the world. Out. My voice was steady now, cold as winter steel. Take your child and leave my home. Now. Mom, you're being ridiculous, Sarah protested, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. She wasn't used to me standing up for myself. Tyler, apologize. To Grandma, and we can all move on. Tyler crossed his arms and glared at me. No, she's mean and old and stupid. Neither Sarah nor Mark corrected him. They just sat there, looking annoyed that their peaceful dinner had been disrupted by my overreaction. That's when I knew. This wasn't about Tyler being a typical kid. This was about a family that had grown comfortable treating me like a servant, expecting me to cook and clean and host while tolerating whatever behavior they dished out. They'd taken my love and generosity for granted for so long that they genuinely believed I had no right to expect anything in return. I'm not asking again, I said, my hand gripping the back of my chair so tightly my knuckles were white. Leave. My house. Sarah stood up with an exaggerated sigh. Fine, we'll go. But don't expect us to come running back when you realize how lonely you'll be without us. The threat was supposed to hurt. It was supposed to make me back down, apologize, beg them to stay. Because that's what I'd always done before. Smoothed things over, made excuses for their behavior, convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But this time, something inside me had broken. Or maybe it had finally healed. I watched in silence as they gathered their things, Sarah huffing and muttering under her breath about how unreasonable I was being, Mark shaking his head like I was a difficult child having a tantrum, Tyler whining that he didn't want to leave yet because he hadn't finished throwing food. As they reached the front door, Sarah turned back with that expression she used to wear as a teenager when she wanted to deliver a particularly cutting blow. You know what? Mom, maybe this is for the best. Tyler's been asking why Grandma's house always smells weird and why you tell the same boring stories over and over. He doesn't even like coming here anymore. We've just been doing it out of obligation. The words were designed to devastate me, to make me feel small and unwanted and desperate to win back their approval. But instead of crumbling, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Good, I said calmly. Then we're all getting what we want. Sarah's mouth fell open. She'd clearly expected tears, pleading, maybe some dramatic gesture to bring them back. Instead, I walked over to the door and held it open wider. Drive safely, I added, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't wish them harm. I just wanted them gone. After the door closed behind them and I heard Mark's car pull out of the driveway, I stood in my foyer for a long moment, listening to the silence. The house felt different somehow. Not empty, but peaceful. Like a held breath finally released. I walked back to the dining room and surveyed the damage. Mashed potatoes on the wall, green beans scattered across the table, that dinner roll still hiding under the china cabinet. The beautiful meal I'd spent hours preparing was ruined, the carefully set table a disaster. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, freedom. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. My financial advisor, Patricia Chen, had been handling my investments for over a decade. She was brilliant, discreet, and most importantly, she understood that a woman's financial independence was her greatest source of power. Patricia? It's Eleanor Whitman. I hope I'm not calling too late. No, everything's fine. Actually, I think it's time we had that conversation about liquidating some of my assets. Yes, the ones we discussed last year. When can we meet? As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. There was still a small smear of mashed potatoes on my chin. My carefully styled gray hair was slightly mussed, and my favorite blouse would probably never be the same. But my eyes were clear and determined in a way they hadn't been for years. See, Sarah and Mark had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that because I was a widow living on what appeared to be a modest pension, I had no real power in this relationship. They thought I needed them more than they needed me. They had no idea about the life insurance money that had been quietly growing in carefully managed investments for the past 8 years, since my husband Robert passed away. They didn't know about the inheritance from my childless Aunt Margaret, that I'd never mentioned to anyone. They certainly had no clue about the small tech company I'd invested in 15 years ago on Patricia's recommendation. The one that had recently been acquired by Google for an absolutely staggering sum. On paper, I looked like any other moderately comfortable retiree. In reality, I was worth just over $12 million, and every penny of it had been quietly earmarked for my family's future. Sarah's children's college funds, her and Mark's mortgage, the dream vacation to Europe they'd been talking about for years. I'd been planning to make all of it possible. I'd even drawn up a will leaving everything to Sarah and Tyler with generous provisions for Mark despite the fact that he wasn't technically family. Because that's what grandmothers do, right? We sacrifice, we give, we make sure our loved ones are taken care of, even when they don't appreciate it. But love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just enabling. I walked back to the dining room and began clearing the table, but not in the defeated, resigned way I might have an hour ago. Now I was cleaning with purpose, already making mental lists and plans. The first call would be to Patricia tomorrow morning to start moving money around. The second would be to my attorney, James Morrison, to discuss some changes to my estate. Planning. The third would be to my travel agent, because it had been far too long since I'd done something purely for myself. As I scraped mashed potatoes off my good china, I thought about Tyler's words. She's mean and old and stupid. The old part was debatable. 62 wasn't exactly ancient these days, but mean and stupid? Well, they were about to find out just how wrong they could be about both of those things. I'd spent 8 years being the perfect grieving widow, the doting grandmother, the selfless mother who never asked for anything in return. I'd cooked thousands of meals, given countless hours of free babysitting, listened to endless complaints about money while quietly planning to solve all their financial problems. But respect isn't something you can buy or earn through service. It's something that has to be freely given, and Sarah's family had made it clear they had none to offer. My phone buzzed with a text message. Sarah, of course. Mom, I hope you're happy. Tyler is crying because he thinks Grandma doesn't love him. Anymore? Was making your point really worth traumatizing a child? I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the familiar tug of guilt and maternal instinct. 6 months ago, that text would have had me in my car within minutes, racing over to their house with apologies and probably a bag of Tyler's favorite cookies. But tonight, I typed back a simple response. Tyler will be fine. Children are remarkably resilient. Good night, Sarah. Then I turned off my phone and headed upstairs for a long, hot bath. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations, and probably a lot of people telling me I was making a mistake. Sarah would likely call other family members to complain about my unreasonable behavior. Mark would probably try that charming smile that used to work when he wanted to smooth things over. But tonight, for the first time in years, I was going to bed without wondering if I'd done enough, given enough, sacrificed enough to earn my family's love. because I'd finally realized that love shouldn't come with a price tag, and self-respect wasn't something I should have to negotiate for in my own home. As I sank into the steaming water, I thought about what Sarah had said. Maybe this is for the best. For once, we were in complete agreement. It was absolutely for the best. She just had no idea how much this decision was going to cost her. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a storm has passed. I woke up at 6:30, my usual time, but instead of the familiar weight of obligation pressing down on my chest, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. I made myself a proper breakfast, not the hurried toast and coffee I usually grabbed before rushing off to some family emergency or babysitting duty, but actual eggs Benedict with fresh hollandaise sauce and a perfectly poached egg. I ate it slowly, savoring each bite while reading the financial section of the newspaper. At precisely 9 o'clock, I called Patricia Chen. "Eleanor." Her voice was warm and professional. "Perfect timing. I was just reviewing your portfolio." "That? Google acquisition really put you in an extraordinary position. How can I help you today?" "I need to make some significant changes, Patricia. Can we meet this afternoon?" "Of course. Is everything all right?" "You sound different." I smiled, stirring cream into my second cup of coffee. "Everything is exactly as it should be for the first time in years. What's your earliest appointment?" "I can clear my schedule for 2 o'clock if this is urgent." "It is. And Patricia, I'll also need James Morris in there. We're going to be discussing some estate planning modifications." 3 hours later, I sat in Patricia's corner office overlooking the city, watching her and James exchange glances as I outlined my intentions. Patricia's expression remained professionally neutral, but James, who'd been handling my legal affairs since Robert's death, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Eleanor," James said carefully, "I understand you're upset with your family, but making financial decisions while emotional—" "James," I interrupted gently, "I've never been less emotional in my life. I'm thinking with perfect clarity. Sarah and Mark have made their priorities clear. I'm simply adjusting my estate planning to reflect those priorities." Patricia leaned forward, her pen poised over her legal pad. "Walk me through exactly what you want to do." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. Inside were copies of text messages, photos of previous incidents where Tyler had destroyed my belongings or acted out, and a detailed log I'd been keeping without really realizing it. Every family gathering, every favor asked, every dismissive comment or ungrateful response. "First, I want to establish a trust for Tyler's future education and basic needs, something that will ensure he's taken care of but can't be accessed by his parents for their own expenses. The trust should be managed by a third party and only release funds for legitimate educational or medical needs." James nodded, making notes. "That's reasonable and responsible." "Second, I want to liquidate the college fund I've been building for Tyler and redirect those assets elsewhere. They've made it clear they don't value my input on his upbringing, so they can figure out how to fund his education themselves." That's over $400,000, Eleanor," Patricia said quietly. "I'm aware." Which brings me to my third point. I want to set up a foundation, the Eleanor and Robert Whitman Foundation for Family Values and Elder Respect. I want to fund programs that support grandparents' rights, elder abuse prevention, and educational initiatives about treating family members with dignity. The room fell silent. James set down his pen and studied my face intently. "Eleanor, are you certain about this? Once we make these changes, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." I opened my purse and pulled out my phone, which had been buzzing constantly since 7 that morning. "Would you like to see what they've been sending me?" I scrolled through the messages and showed them the screen. Sarah had sent 14 texts since dawn, each one more demanding than the last. "Mom, Tyler had nightmares all night because you scared him." Mark says you owe us an apology for ruining dinner. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. Tyler wants to know why Grandma doesn't love him anymore. What am I supposed to tell him? We're coming over at noon to talk sense into you. The last message sent just 20 minutes ago made my blood run cold. If you don't want to be part of this family anymore, fine. But don't expect us to keep bringing Tyler around for your entertainment when you're lonely. Patricia read over my shoulder, and her expression hardened. They're using your grandson as emotional blackmail. Exactly. And this morning I realized something important. They've been doing it for years. Every time I tried to set boundaries or express frustration with Tyler's behavior, suddenly I was the one hurting him. Every time I suggested they might want to parent their child instead of expecting me to tolerate his disrespect, I was being too harsh or not understanding. I put my phone away and looked at both of them steadily. I've spent 8 years since Robert died trying to be the perfect widow, the perfect mother, the perfect grandmother. I've given them my time, my energy, my money, and my patience. And yesterday, I realized that all I've really done is teach them that I have no value beyond what I can provide for them. James cleared his throat. What about the rest of your estate? The house? The other investments? The house will go to charity when I die. Probably Habitat for Humanity. They understand the value of building something meaningful. As for the other investments, I paused, considering. I want to use some of that money while I'm still alive to enjoy myself. When was the last time I took a vacation that wasn't centered around visiting family? When did I last buy myself something purely because I wanted it? Patricia was already pulling up financial projections on her computer. If we liquidate the college fund and redirect those assets to the foundation, you'll still have approximately $11.6 million in other holdings. That's more than enough to live very comfortably while funding the charitable work you want to do. Perfect. Now, about the trust for Tyler. I want it structured so that the funds can only be accessed for education, healthcare, or genuine emergencies. Not for vacations, toys, or bailing his parents out of financial trouble. That's standard language, James confirmed. We can also include provisions that require the trust manager to verify all expenses. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mark calling. I declined the call and turned the phone face down. They're getting desperate, I observed, which tells me everything I need to know about their motivations. James leaned back in his chair, studying me with the expression he used when he was about to give difficult advice. Eleanor, I have to ask, have you considered that Sarah might genuinely not understand why you're so upset? Some people truly don't realize when they're being disrespectful. I thought about that for a moment. James, yesterday, Tyler threw food at me for the 4th time this week. When I asked Sarah to address his behavior, she told me I was being dramatic. When I insisted on basic respect in my own home, Mark told me I'd forgotten what it's like to deal with children because it's been so long. When Tyler called me mean, old, and stupid, neither of them corrected him. Patricia winced. And then, they threatened to stop bringing him around when you finally stood up for yourself. Exactly. This isn't about misunderstanding. This is about a family that's grown comfortable treating me like hired help and gets angry when I remind them I'm actually a human being who deserves respect. My phone started ringing again. Sarah, this time, then immediately again. They're not going to stop, I said, powering off the phone entirely. Which is why we need to move quickly. How soon can we have the paperwork ready? Give me until Thursday, James said. I'll need to draft the foundation documents and the new trust structures. Patricia, how long for the asset transfers? 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we want to do this properly and avoid any tax complications. I nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. Perfect. And gentlemen, I want this done quietly. No announcements, no dramatic revelations. Just clean legal documents that reflect my actual wishes rather than what other people think I should want. As I gathered my things to leave, Patricia walked me to the door. "Eleanor, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "How long have you been planning this?" Some of these decisions are quite sophisticated for someone who claims to have just reached her breaking point yesterday. I smiled, adjusting my purse strap. I wasn't planning it consciously, but I think part of me has been preparing for this moment for years. Every time Sarah dismissed my concerns, every time Mark talked down to me, every time Tyler acted out and they blamed me for not handling it better, some part of me was keeping score. And yesterday I finally listened to that part of myself instead of the part that was afraid of being alone. When I got home, there were 2 cars in my driveway, Sarah's SUV and a vehicle I didn't recognize. Through my front window, I could see at least 4 people in my living room. I sat in my car for a moment, considering my options. I could drive away, wait for them to leave, and avoid the confrontation entirely. 6 months ago, that's probably what I would have done. Instead, I walked up to my front door and used my key. The conversation in the living room stopped abruptly as I entered. Sarah was there, of course, along with Mark and Tyler, but they'd also brought reinforcements, my sister Janet and Sarah's mother-in-law, Carol. Both women looked distinctly uncomfortable, which told me they'd been recruited rather than volunteering for this intervention. "Mom!" Sarah jumped up, her face a mixture of relief and frustration. "Finally! We've been waiting for over an hour." "In my house," I said calmly, setting my purse on the hall table. "Without my permission." Mark stood up, turning on that charming smile that used to work so well. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened yesterday. I think there's been a big misunderstanding." Tyler was sprawled on my white sofa with muddy shoes, playing a handheld video game with the volume turned up loud enough to be genuinely annoying. When he saw me, he didn't look up or acknowledge my presence at all. "Tyler," I said firmly, "feet off my furniture." He ignored me completely. "Tyler." Sarah snapped, but her tone was more embarrassed than angry. "Do what Grandma says." "She's not my real grandma anyway," Tyler muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Real grandmas give you presents and don't yell all the time." The room fell completely silent. Janet looked horrified. Carol was studying her hands intently, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. Sarah's face went bright red. "Tyler, that's not... We didn't... Where did he get that idea?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Mark jumped in quickly. "Kids say all kinds of things, Mom. You know how they are. They pick up fragments of conversations and..." "What conversations, Mark?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mark's confident expression began to crack around the edges. It was Janet who finally broke the silence. "Eleanor, maybe we should all sit down and talk about this calmly. Sarah called me because she's worried about you. She thinks you might be... struggling." I looked at my sister, 5 years younger than me, divorced twice, currently living in a studio apartment because she'd never learned to manage money, and felt a bubble of hysterical laughter building in my chest. "Struggling with what, exactly?" "Well," Carol said carefully, "Sarah mentioned that you've been emotional lately, unpredictable. She's concerned that losing Robert has finally caught up with you and you might not be thinking clearly." There it was, the narrative they'd constructed to explain away my newfound backbone. I wasn't standing up for myself. I was having a breakdown. I wasn't demanding respect. I was being irrational due to grief. It was brilliant, really. If they could convince everyone that I was mentally unstable, then nothing I said or did could be taken seriously. Any changes I made to my will or estate planning could be challenged as the actions of someone not in their right mind. "I see," I said slowly. So yesterday when Tyler threw food at me and called me stupid, and I asked him to leave, that was me having a breakdown? Mom, Sarah said in that patronizing tone people use with elderly relatives they think are losing their faculties. Tyler is 8 years old. You can't take the things children say seriously. And the food throwing. Boys do that. It's normal. Behavior. Is it? I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled out a photo album, flipping to a picture of Sarah at Tyler's age. I don't remember you throwing food at your grandmother, or at me, or at anyone, for that matter. Sarah's jaw tightened. That was different. How? Times have changed, Mom. Child psychology has evolved. We understand now that kids need to express themselves, and being too strict can cause psychological damage. I looked around the room at these people who had invaded my home to lecture me about my mental state and felt the last traces of doubt or guilt evaporate completely. Get out, I said calmly. Eleanor, Janet protested. We're just trying to help. Get out of my house, all of you, right now. Tyler finally looked up from his game, grinning like he thought this was entertaining. Are you gonna throw food at us, Grandma? The casual cruelty of it, the way he'd turned my humiliation from yesterday into a joke, was the final straw. I walked to my front door and held it open. You have 30 seconds to leave before I call the police and have you removed. For trespassing, Mark laughed uncertainly. Come on, Mom. You're not serious. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 but didn't hit send yet. 15 seconds. The scramble was almost comical. Carol practically ran for the door, muttering about how she'd tried to tell them this was a bad idea. Janet followed, shooting me. A look that was equal parts hurt and confusion. Sarah grabbed Tyler's hand and jerked him off the sofa, but paused at the door. This isn't over, Mom. We're going to get you some help whether you want it or not. Goodbye, Sarah. After they left, I walked through my house assessing the damage. Muddy footprints on my white sofa. Water rings on my coffee table where they'd set drinks without using coasters. Tyler's game system still plugged into my television, which meant they'd planned to stay for quite a while. I unplugged the game system and set it on my front porch, then sent Sarah a text. Tyler left his toy. It's on the porch. Her response came immediately. We're not done talking about this. I typed back, yes we are. Any further communication should go through my attorney, James Morrison. Then I included his contact information and blocked all their numbers. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in 8 years, my house was truly mine again. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window that looked out over my garden. The afternoon light was soft and golden, and I could see the first hints of spring in the cherry tree Robert had planted for our 30th anniversary. My phone had one unread message from Patricia. Asset transfers approved. Foundation paperwork. We'll be ready by Wednesday. Are you sure about this? I typed back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As the sun set, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't cooking dinner for anyone, cleaning up after anyone, or worrying about anyone else's needs or feelings. It was the most peaceful evening I'd had in longer than I could remember. 3 weeks passed in blissful silence. No demanding phone calls, no last-minute babysitting requests, no chaotic Sunday dinners that left my house looking like a hurricane had blown through. For the first time since Robert's death, I had my life back. I spent my mornings in the garden, coaxing my roses back to life after years of neglect. I took a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. I read books without interruption, took long walks without checking my phone every 5 minutes, and discovered that retirement could actually be enjoyable when you weren't constantly at everyone else's beck and call. The legal paperwork was finalized on a Tuesday. James called that afternoon to confirm everything was in order. The Eleanor and Robert Whitman Foundation is officially established, he said. $4 million in initial funding, with provisions for additional contributions as needed. Tyler's educational trust is set at $200,000, enough for college tuition and reasonable expenses, but managed by an independent trustee. The rest remains in your personal accounts for your use. And the house? Will go to Habitat for Humanity upon your death, as specified. Eleanor, I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain about these decisions? I was standing in my kitchen, looking out at the bird feeder Robert had installed years ago. A family of cardinals had taken up residence there, and I'd been enjoying watching their daily routines. James, yesterday I woke up at 9:30 because I felt like it. I had French toast for lunch because I wanted it. I spent 2 hours reading a novel in the garden without anyone demanding my attention. When was the last time I could say that? Point taken. I just want to make sure you won't regret this if Sarah comes to her senses and apologizes. I considered that possibility. If Sarah genuinely apologizes, not one of those "I'm sorry you were hurt" non-apologies, but an actual acknowledgement that she was wrong, then we can rebuild our relationship. But the financial decisions stand. I've learned that mixing money with family dynamics is toxic for everyone involved. That evening, I got my first real test of resolve. Janet called from the hospital. Eleanor, you need to come quickly. Tyler's been hurt. My grandmother instincts kicked in immediately. What happened? Is he okay? He fell off his bike and broke his arm. Sarah's hysterical, and Mark's trying to deal with insurance paperwork. She keeps asking for you. The old me would have been in my car within seconds, racing to the hospital, with my checkbook ready to cover any expenses insurance didn't handle. But something made me pause. Janet, is Tyler in immediate danger? Well, no, but does he need surgery or any emergency treatment? The doctor said it's a clean break. They're putting on a cast. Then Sarah and Mark can handle it. They're his parents. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Eleanor, he's asking for you. The emotional manipulation was so obvious it was almost insulting. Janet, 3 weeks ago, Tyler told me I wasn't his real grandmother. His parents have made it clear they don't want my input on his upbringing. Why would they want me there now? Because... Janet's voice trailed off as she realized she didn't have a good answer. Because they need my credit card? That's not fair. Isn't it? When have they ever wanted me around except when they needed something? I heard muffled voices in the background. Then Janet came back on the line. Sarah wants to talk to you. Tell Sarah to call my attorney if she has something to say to me. I hung up and immediately felt the familiar wave of guilt washing over me. Tyler was hurt, and I was refusing to help. What kind of grandmother did that make me? But then I remembered his cruel laughter when he threw food at me, his dismissive attitude when I tried to set boundaries, his parents' complete lack of respect for me as a person. I remembered Carol and Janet staging an intervention to convince everyone I was mentally unstable. Love without respect isn't love. It's exploitation with a pretty name. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Whitman? This is Dr. Jennifer Martinez from Children's Hospital. I have Sarah Brennan here, and she's asking me to call you about her son Tyler's treatment. My heart clenched. Is Tyler in danger? Oh no, nothing like that. He has a simple fracture that we've already treated. He's going home tonight with a cast and some pain medication. Mrs. Brennan seems to be under the impression that you handle the family's medical expenses. I closed my eyes. Of course Sarah had told the hospital to bill me without even asking. Doctor, I am not responsible for Tyler's medical bills. His parents should provide their insurance information. I see. Well, they do have insurance, but Mrs. Brennan was hoping. She mentioned something about special circumstances. There are no special circumstances. Tyler's parents are employed adults with health insurance. They can handle their child's medical expenses like any other family. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet living room and realized that this was exactly what my future would look like. If I gave in now, every crisis, every expense, every inconvenience would become my responsibility, while they continued to treat me like hired help. The next morning, Janet showed up at my door looking haggard and frustrated. "Eleanor, we need to talk." I let her in but didn't offer coffee. This wasn't a social visit. "How's Tyler?" "He's fine. Milking the attention, actually." "But Eleanor, what you did yesterday." She shook her head. I've never seen Sarah so upset. She couldn't understand why her own mother would abandon her when she needed help. "Janet," Tyler broke his arm. He didn't need a heart transplant. Sarah and Mark are perfectly capable adults with health insurance and steady incomes. Why would they need me there? "Because you're family." "Am I?" "Because 3 weeks ago Tyler announced I wasn't his real grandmother. Sarah told me I was too old to understand children." Mark laughed when Tyler disrespected me. "Carol suggested I was mentally unstable. You all came to my house uninvited to stage an intervention. When exactly in that scenario was I treated like family?" Janet sank into my armchair, looking older than her 57 years. "Eleanor, I think you're taking this too seriously. Kids say mean things sometimes. Sarah and Mark were just frustrated." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop. Do you hear yourself right now? You're making excuses for their behavior while expecting me to simply accept whatever treatment they dish out. When did that become okay? Since when do you keep score like this? You used to be so easygoing, so understanding. I used to be a doormat. There's a difference." Janet flinched like I'd slapped her. "That's not... You were never a doormat. You were generous and loving, and I was convenient. There's a difference there, too." I walked to my front window and looked out at my garden, where the daffodils were finally starting to bloom. "Janet, let me ask you something. In the 8 years since Robert died, how many times has Sarah called me just to see how I was doing? Not because she needed babysitting or wanted me to cook dinner or needed help with something, just to check. On me?" Janet was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I do. 0. Sarah calls when she needs something. Mark is polite when he wants something. Tyler tolerates me when his parents tell him he has to. That's not family. That's a business arrangement where I provide services and they provide occasional company. But Tyler loves you. Does he? Or does he love what I do for him? The toys I buy, the treats I make, the activities I plan. Because the moment I ask for basic respect in return, suddenly I'm the problem. Janet stood up, her expression shifting from confusion to anger. "Fine. You want to be bitter and alone? That's your choice. But don't come crying to us when you realize what you've thrown away." After she left, I made myself lunch and sat in my garden with a book. The afternoon was warm and peaceful, and for the first time in weeks, I felt completely at ease with my decisions. That evening, Patricia called, with an update on the foundation. "We've received our first grant application," she said, excitement clear in her voice. "A support group for grandparents dealing with parental alienation. They're asking for $15,000 to fund counseling services and legal assistance. Approve it." "Just like that?" I smiled, watching the cardinals at my bird feeder. "Just like that. That's exactly why we created the foundation." Over the following weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. I hired a housekeeper, not because I couldn't clean my own home, but because I could afford to pay someone else to do it, and I wanted to spend my time on things I actually enjoyed. I started volunteering at the local literacy center, teaching adults to read. I took a weekend trip to the coast just because I felt like seeing the ocean. The foundation began funding programs across 3 states, support groups for isolated, elderly people, legal assistance for grandparents seeking visitation rights, educational workshops on family communication and respect. Each check we wrote felt like money finally being used for something meaningful. Sarah made a few attempts to reach out through mutual friends and distant relatives, But the message was always the same. She wanted to work things out, which translated to get back in Mom's good graces so the money starts flowing again. Tyler's educational trust remained untouched. The trustee I'd appointed, a former colleague of Robert's who specialized in family financial planning, confirmed that Sarah had called several times asking about accessing the funds for educational expenses like a new computer, summer camps, and private tutoring. Each request was politely denied according to the strict terms I'd established. Then, 6 months after that first Sunday dinner disaster, I got a call that changed everything. "Mrs. Whitman? This is Principal Davis from Oakwood Elementary. I'm calling about Tyler Brennan." My blood went cold. "Has he been hurt?" "No, nothing like that. But I'm afraid we need to discuss some behavioral issues. Tyler has been... Well, there's no gentle way to put this. He's been bullying other children quite severely. Today, he threw food at a classmate during lunch and called him stupid. When the lunch monitor intervened, Tyler told her she couldn't tell him what to do because grown-ups were stupid too." I closed my eyes, seeing the pattern emerge with devastating clarity. "Mrs. Brennan listed you as an emergency contact," Principal Davis continued. "She said you might be able to help us understand Tyler's home situation. His behavior has been escalating, and we're running out of options before we have to consider suspension. What do his parents say about this?" "That's part of the problem. They seem to think this is normal behavior that Tyler will outgrow." Mrs. Brennan used the phrase "boys will be boys" several times during our conference. "But Mrs. Whitman, throwing food at people and calling adults stupid isn't typical boy behavior. It's concerning antisocial behavior that needs immediate intervention." After I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences. Tyler was becoming exactly what his parents had raised him to be, a child who believed he could treat people however he wanted without facing any real consequences. But he was still a child. Still young enough to learn better if someone was willing to teach him. I called James Morrison. "I want to set up a meeting with Sarah and Mark, not to reconcile, to offer them one final option." "Eleanor, are you sure that's wise?" "Probably not, but it's necessary." The meeting took place in James's conference room on a gray Thursday afternoon. Sarah arrived looking hopeful, Mark suspicious, and both of them clearly expecting me to cave and restore the status quo. "Mom," Sarah began, "I'm so glad you called. We've all been miserable without—" "Stop." I set a folder on the conference table between us. "This isn't a reconciliation. It's a business proposition." Mark's expression hardened. "What kind of business?" "Tyler is having serious behavioral problems at school. The principal called me because he's throwing food at other children and calling adults stupid. Does that sound familiar?" Sarah's face flushed. "Kids have problems sometimes. It's not that serious. He's 8 years old and he's bullying other children. If you don't address this now, he's going to become the kind of teenager who makes other kids' lives miserable. And then the kind of adult who treats service workers like garbage and thinks respect is optional." "So what are you proposing?" Mark asked coldly. I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "Family therapy, all of you. Twice a week for 6 months minimum with Dr. Patricia Hendricks. She specializes in family dynamics and child behavioral issues." "We don't need therapy," Sarah started. "Yes, you do. Tyler has learned that he can treat people disrespectfully without consequences because that's what he sees at home. He's learned that throwing food and calling people names is acceptable because you've never taught him otherwise." Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "And if we refuse? Then Tyler grows up to be the kind of person who throws food at his grandmother and calls her stupid while his parents laugh about it. And when he's an adult and wondering why nobody wants to be around him, you can explain that you chose enabling over parenting." The room fell silent. Sarah was staring at the therapy agreement like it was written in a foreign language. "What's in this for you?" Mark asked suspiciously. "Nothing. Tyler's educational trust remains as it is." The foundation continues its work. I continue living my life in peace. This is purely an offer to help Tyler become a better person before it's too late. Sarah looked up, tears in her eyes. And if we do the therapy? Would we be family again? It was the first vulnerable, genuine thing she'd said to me in months. For a moment, I felt the old tug of maternal instinct, the desire to smooth things over and pretend the past year hadn't happened. But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. They can only be replaced with something entirely new. Sarah, if you complete the therapy program and Tyler learns to treat people with respect, then we can try to build a new relationship. Not the old one where I give and you take, but something healthier for all of us. And if we refuse? Sarah asked, quietly. Then Tyler is your responsibility alone. No financial support beyond the educational trust. No emergency grandmother to call when things get difficult. No safety net when life gets overwhelming. You'll have exactly what you said you wanted. Complete autonomy over your family decisions. They left without signing the agreement. I wasn't surprised. 2 months later, I heard through Janet that Tyler had been suspended from school for pushing a smaller child off playground equipment. Sarah and Mark were now dealing with mandatory meetings with school counselors and possible legal consequences if Tyler's behavior didn't improve. The educational trust remained in place, waiting for Tyler to grow old enough to access it for legitimate academic purposes. The foundation continued funding programs for families dealing with similar issues, and I continued living my peaceful, purposeful life. Sometimes, on quiet Sunday afternoons, I missed the chaos of family dinners. I missed Tyler's laughter when he wasn't being cruel, and Sarah's smile when she wasn't being demanding. I missed the idea of the family I thought we were, but I never missed the disrespect, the manipulation, or the constant feeling that I was valued only for what I could provide. Love without respect isn't really love at all. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst behavior, even when that someone is family. 6 months after our last conversation, I received a card in the mail. Inside was a photo of Tyler in his baseball uniform, smiling broadly. On the back, in Sarah's handwriting, Tyler made the team and hasn't had any behavioral problems in 3 months. We started therapy. Maybe we could talk sometime? I put the card on my refrigerator next to a photo of the literacy students I'd been working with. Then I called Patricia to discuss funding a new program for children's anger management counseling. Some stories don't have happy endings where everyone reconciles and lives happily ever after. But sometimes, the best ending is the one where everyone learns that respect isn't optional, love isn't transactional, and setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. And sometimes the most important person you need to save is yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.